Copenhagen, October 2nd, 2025, Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen delivered a stark warning as European leaders gathered in Copenhagen for an informal summit of the European political community. Against a backdrop of growing Russian aggression and repeated drone incursions into European airspace, Frederiksen insisted that Europe is not acting quickly enough to rearm and defend itself against mounting hybrid threats. Speaking to reporters outside the summit venue, Frederiksen set the tone for a day dominated by defence and security discussions. She underscored the need for immediate and coordinated action to counter new forms of warfare, particularly cyberattacks, sabotage operations and drone incursions, which she argued have already become a central feature of Europe's security crisis. Mette Frederiksen said, "There are not only hybrid attacks, there is currently a hybrid war going on in Europe. This is part of our rearmament because when I talk about rearming Europe, it also means making European society more robust. I think we must, of course, focus on cyber attacks and sabotage risks and anti-drone capabilities. That's why it was good that we had discussions yesterday with the European Union about building a kind of anti-drone wall that can be used, of course, especially in the context of a hybrid war." The Danish leader's words reflected both urgency and frustration. She stressed that the threat posed by Russia's evolving tactics had been underestimated for too long, and that Europe's response was lagging behind the scale and pace of the danger. Frederiksen's remarks came amid a surge of reported Russian drone incursions into Danish and other European airspace, incidents that have alarmed governments across the continent. European intelligence officials have warned that Moscow is using hybrid tactics, blending conventional military threats with cyber sabotage, disinformation and low-intensity incursions to probe and destabilize EU member states. Mette Frederiksen stated, "There is not only hybrid attacks, there is a hybrid war going on in Europe right now. It is part of rearming ourselves because when I say rearming Europe, it means also make a more robust European society. I think we have to focus, of course, on the cyber attacks and the risk of sabotage and anti-drone capacities. Therefore, it was good that we had discussions with the European Union yesterday about building a kind of a drone wall that can be used, of course, especially when it comes to hybrid war." This statement, repeated for emphasis, highlighted her insistence that the battle is not hypothetical or confined to Ukraine's borders, but is already unfolding within Europe itself. Frederiksen argued that despite progress in military support for Ukraine, Europe still lacks the urgency and scale required to confront the Russian threat effectively. Mette Frederiksen said, "We are not moving quickly enough on anything, meaning that I think everybody underestimated how big a threat Russia actually is. Not saying that we haven't done anything, because we are doing a lot. And my hope is that everybody will recognize that we have to look at Ukraine as the first line of defense. So everything we do in Ukraine is defending ourselves and the rest of Europe." Her call for greater speed and determination echoed sentiments increasingly voiced by leaders in frontline EU states like Poland, the Baltic countries and Finland, all of whom have long urged Western Europe to wake up to Moscow's hybrid aggression. Frederiksen further warned that Europe could not afford to wait until the mid-2030-50s to reach adequate defence readiness. Mette Frederiksen warned, "We are doing a lot, but we have to speed up and we have to scale up. I would say that 2035 will be too late when we are talking about rearming Europe. We have to be able to fully defend ourselves, I would say, by 2030. This timeline sets a far more ambitious target than many existing EU and NATO defence plans, which envision gradual increases in military spending and capabilities over the next decade. By stating that 2035 would be too late, Frederiksen sent a clear message that the current pace of rearmament risks leaving Europe exposed in the critical years ahead. The Danish leader's mention of an anti-drone wall reflects a growing consensus in Europe that defence against hybrid threats cannot rely solely on traditional armies and weapons. Instead, it requires new infrastructure to detect, intercept and neutralise drones, many of which are used for surveillance, sabotage or even direct attacks. The idea, discussed at the summit, building a shared European anti-drone shield, mirrors earlier initiatives such as the Iron Dome missile defence system in Israel, but would focus on smaller, cheaper and more rapidly deployed drone threats. Frederiksen framed this effort not just as a military necessity, but as part of strengthening Europe's societal resilience against new forms of warfare. Throughout her remarks, Frederiksen emphasized that continued and accelerated support for Ukraine is not charity, but self-defense for the rest of Europe. By calling Ukraine the first line of defense, she sought to underline the direct connection between the outcome of the war and Europe's own security. This framing is aimed at rallying European public opinion and countering fatigue in some capitals where prolonged military aid has become politically contentious. Her argument reinforced the position that Europe's security begins not on the borders of NATO, but on the battlefields of eastern Ukraine. The Copenhagen summit brought together leaders from across the EU and other European political community states at a time when fears of Russian hybrid attacks are intensifying. The meeting's agenda included proposals for joint defence procurement, more integrated air defence networks, and accelerated delivery of arms and ammunition to Ukraine. But Frederiksen's comments about the urgency of rearmament and her 2030 deadline added a sharper sense of immediacy to the proceedings. EU officials acknowledged that bureaucratic processes and competing national priorities have slowed progress, even as security threats continue to grow. Frederiksen's remarks reflect a wider European realization that the post-Cold War era of reduced defense spending and reliance on US security guarantees is over. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 prompted a historic policy shift across Europe. But 3 years on, leaders like Frederiksen are warning that progress still falls short of the threat. Hybrid tactics, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, sabotage of undersea cables and drone incursions have forced a rethinking of what national security means in the 21st century. By demanding faster action and an earlier defence readiness deadline, Frederiksen positioned Denmark as one of the voices pushing Europe to accelerate its military transformation. Frederiksen's statements in Copenhagen were not merely national concerns, but an appeal to all of Europe to recognise the immediacy of the challenge. Her repeated emphasis on speed up and scale up underlines a belief that the window for Europe to prepare itself is narrowing. The 2030 timeline she cited serves both as a warning and a call to arms for European leaders who may still be debating budget allocations and timelines while hybrid threats intensify at their borders. The Copenhagen summit underscored that Europe's security debate is no longer abstract or long-term, but an urgent priority. Frederiksen's words place the responsibility squarely on today's leaders to act, not in a decade, but in the next few years.
Good morning, and first of all, welcome once again to Copenhagen. So today, because there is not only hybrid attacks, there is a hybrid war going on in Europe right now. It is part of rearming ourselves, because when I say rearming Europe, it means also make a more robust European society. I think we have to focus, of course, on the cyber attacks and the risk of sabotage and anti-drone capacities. And therefore it was good that we had discussions with the European Union yesterday about building a kind of a drone wall that can be used, of course, especially when it comes to hybrid war. Well, we are not moving quickly enough on anything, meaning that I think everybody underestimated how big a threat Russia actually is. Not saying that we haven't done anything, because we are doing a lot. And my hope is that everybody will recognize that we have to look at Ukraine as the first line of defense. So everything we do in Ukraine is defending ourselves in the rest of Europe. So we are doing a lot, but we have to speed up and we have to scale up. I would say that 2035 will be too late. When we are talking about rearming Europe, we have to be able to defend ourselves totally, I will say, at 2030.